Welcome again to Dark Case Diaries, where depths are shown. Please like, view, and share thanks a million. What you didn't see in the viral video. The moment the world saw. It began with a flicker, a 10-second clip captured on a stranger's shaky smartphone. A grainy, chaotic video uploaded anonymously on a rainy Wednesday night. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. By morning, it was everywhere, every social media platform, every news anchor's desk, every group chat, every college hallway. The video showed a young black man in a faded gray hoodie, his hands up, his voice shaking, backed against the cold brick wall of a downtown alley. A white police officer, twice his size, screamed inaudible commands, gun drawn. Then, pop, the sound that changed everything. The video cut out just before impact. There was no context, no lead-up, no resolution. Just horror, just assumptions, and millions of angry fingers hitting share. What no one knew, not yet, was that the video only told half the story. What they didn't see was everything. Isaiah McCall was 22, a first-generation college graduate. He had just finished his last shift at the diner near 8th Street before heading home to surprise his mother with tickets to a poetry reading she always dreamed of attending. He had saved 3 paychecks for it. He loved jazz, his little sister's drawings, and Sunday mornings at church. His friends joked that Isaiah was too gentle for the world he lived in, too patient, too trusting. He'd give his umbrella away in a storm. He once stopped to carry a limping stray dog 7 blocks to a vet. And yet, in a matter of 10 seconds, a camera caught a frame where Isaiah looked guilty, dangerous, a threat. Hank was 49, a veteran of the force for over 2 decades. He'd seen things most people couldn't stomach. His knees ached, his eyesight was fading, and most nights he fell asleep in his cruiser during the last hour of his shift. His wife had left years ago. His son refused to talk to him. Hank wasn't a bad man, but he was tired. Tired in the kind of way that seeps into your bones and makes mistakes feel like habits. He didn't trust the streets anymore. He wasn't supposed to be on patrol that night. He was covering for a rookie who'd called in sick. That's when he saw Isaiah, standing still, looking behind nervously, checking his phone, suspicious. He pulled over, and the dominoes began to fall. The teenager who filmed the video was named Lila Martinez. She was 17, hiding behind a dumpster when the confrontation began. She didn't know Isaiah. She didn't know Hank. But she knew how it looked. She uploaded the video to TikTok with 3 words. This is murder. It was shared by influencers, politicians, activists, and even celebrities. It reached 40 million views in 12 hours. Protesters gathered before sunrise. Hashtags exploded. The mayor gave a press conference by 10 a.m. No one knew the full story. But they knew the video. They knew the frame. And that was enough. Isaiah didn't hear the sirens. Didn't see the phone pointed at him. He only heard the voice behind him bark, "Hands up!" His phone slipped from his fingers as he instinctively raised his hands. His heart pounded like a war drum, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he knew the stories, the names, the hashtags, the split-second reactions that stole futures. The alley behind Midtown Bank had no cameras, only one flickering streetlight. Isaiah tried to speak. "I worked down the street. I just got off shift." But to Hank's ears, it was mumbling, excuses, movement, "Don't move." Hank shouted, voice cracking with years of unspoken fear and adrenaline. Then the rookie mistake, the accidental trigger tug, a shot, a scream, and then silence. Here's what the video didn't show. The shot missed. It ricocheted off a rusted pipe and struck the brick. Dust and smoke exploded behind Isaiah. He collapsed, not from the bullet, but from the overwhelming panic. His chest heaved. His limbs trembled. He thought he was dead. Hank's face went white. Not because he meant to kill him, but because in that moment, he realized he almost had. He lowered his weapon and called for backup. He knelt beside Isaiah, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought you were someone else." Isaiah blinked slowly, too terrified to speak. But by the time help arrived, the narrative had already begun forming online, and there was no room left for what actually happened. Before the police report was even written, the court of public opinion had sentenced Hank. To many, he was another name on a growing list of cops who walked free. To others, he was a warning sign of systemic rot. Commentators battled on cable news. A protest was scheduled in front of City Hall. Isaiah's face appeared on murals, shirts, and banners. Even though he hadn't spoken publicly, he was recovering in a hospital, confused, overwhelmed, and afraid. Every time he turned on the news, he saw his own face next to the word victim. But no one had asked him how he felt. Isaiah's mother, Denise McCall, sat beside him every night, holding his hand. She had raised him to believe in dialogue, in dignity, in truth. But even she didn't know what to say now. She watched her son withdraw, retreat inward, terrified that anything he said could make things worse. When a local news anchor called, asking for a televised interview, Isaiah refused. "I'm not ready," he said. But deep down, he knew if he didn't speak his truth, someone else would write it for him. And they already were. There was one other person who saw what happened that night. Her name was Officer Riley Grant. She was the rookie Hank was covering for, but she'd come in anyway, feeling guilty. She arrived just moments after the shot and quietly stood by as paramedics rushed in. She noticed the angle of the bullet hole. She saw Isaiah's untouched hoodie, and she listened as Hank, still stunned, whispered his apology to a boy he thought he'd killed. She could have stayed silent. It would have been easier, but she filed her own report, and it told the truth. 3 weeks later, Isaiah sat across from journalist Maya Elridge on a national talk show. She had a reputation for letting people breathe on air. No rush, no traps, just honest conversation. Isaiah wore a navy blue button-up, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The world was watching. "I'm not here to hate," he began, voice trembling. "I'm here to heal." He explained the shot missed, that he wasn't harmed physically, that Officer Hank made a mistake, one that almost cost him his life. But that night also almost broke Hank's. "People think I'm lucky to be alive," Isaiah said. "But I'm not just lucky. I was spared for a reason. And I think that reason is to remind people what grace looks like, what truth looks like, what real accountability means." The internet froze. Then it erupted. Isaiah's words didn't trend immediately. Not at first. They didn't scream. They didn't accuse. They didn't fit into the outrage algorithm. But they lingered. People watched the interview again and again. Then someone clipped it, a short reel of Isaiah saying, "I was spared for a reason. And I think that reason is to remind people what grace looks like." That moment, just 19 seconds long, traveled across every major platform within 48 hours. Hashtag Grace in the Alley began trending. Celebrities reposted it. School teachers used it in classrooms. Activists and pastors quoted it. And somewhere in a dark, quiet room, Officer Hank Rowley watched the clip on an old tablet with tears running silently down his face. A week after the interview, a letter arrived at Isaiah's apartment. No return address. Inside was a single piece of lined paper, folded neatly, smelling faintly of cologne and rust. It read, "Isaiah, I don't deserve your kindness, but I needed it more than you'll ever know. You saved more than your own life that night. You saved mine. I'm trying to be better. I want to be better. Thank you for showing me how. H." Isaiah folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. Then he cried, harder than he ever had before, not out of anger, but out of release. Denise McCall had always believed in miracles. She just never thought she'd see one like this. She watched her son grow into his voice, not the loud, defiant roar the world often demanded, but a deeper strength, the strength to forgive, the strength to lead. One Sunday morning, standing in the back of her church, Denise gave a testimony. "I prayed for God to keep my boys safe," she said. "But he did more than that. He used my son to teach the city something I'd forgotten, that love, even when wounded, can still speak." The congregation stood in silence, many with tears in their eyes. Isaiah returned to that alley 6 months later. This time, not alone. With him stood community leaders, the mayor, Officer Riley Grant, and Hank Rowley himself. The city had painted a mural across the brick wall. It showed two hands, one dark, one light, intertwined. Above it, in Isaiah's own handwriting, were the words, "What you didn't see was a choice to forgive." Hank stood quietly beside him. He didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't pose. He simply looked at Isaiah and Isaiah nodded back. Sometimes healing doesn't need words. Isaiah began speaking at schools, then universities, then national conferences, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a voice of restoration. He launched an organization called Frame the Truth, dedicated to training young people in critical media literacy, conflict de-escalation, and justice reform. "We can't stop every viral video," he said during one TED Talk, "but we can teach people to look closer, to ask questions, to see the whole frame, not just a flash." Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up by the thousands. Hank rallied and returned to force. But he didn't disappear either. He joined a police accountability board. He visited training academies to share his story, his failures, regret, and his second chance. Most officers were uncomfortable with it. Some rolled their eyes, but a few rookies listened, and they remembered. Hank never tried to justify what happened, but he never stopped trying to make sure it didn't happen again. 1 year after the video went viral, Isaiah stood on stage at the National Peace and Justice Summit. He was introduced as the young man whose silence almost ended him and whose voice is now helping rebuild America's soul. He smiled at the audience. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just someone who refused to be defined by someone else's lens." And then, from the side of the stage, Denise walked out holding a piece of paper. She whispered to her son, "You've got one more thing to read." It was an official pardon for Hank Rowley, signed by the mayor, not to erase what happened, but to recognize the work he'd done since. Isaiah read it aloud to the crowd. And then, to everyone's surprise, he asked Hank to join him on stage. They hugged, not as enemies, not even as former adversaries, but as two broken people who had decided not to stay broken. Not everyone was ready to celebrate. The day Isaiah hugged Hank on stage, social media once again split into war zones. Some praised him as a saint. Others accused him of being a sellout. There were tweets that said, "Forgiveness is fine, but justice matters more. Hank should be in jail, not on a stage. This ain't grace, it's weakness." But Isaiah didn't flinch. He addressed it directly in a live stream that night. "You don't forgive because someone deserves it. You forgive because you deserve peace." His voice didn't shake. His eyes didn't blink. He looked into that camera like he was speaking to every broken heart in the country. By that fall, Isaiah started receiving thousands of handwritten letters, most from people who had survived violence, racial profiling, police trauma, and forgiveness fatigue. One letter read, "My brother was shot by a cop last year. I've hated every badge since. But your words, they made me cry for the first time in months." Another, "I've been a police officer 27 years. I nearly quit because of the shame and guilt I carry. Watching your speech saved my life." And one from a 10-year-old boy, "Dear Isaiah, I want to be brave like you. When I get scared, I remember your face. Thank you." Isaiah kept everyone. He read them out loud at community events. He used them as curriculum in workshops. Because these weren't just stories. They were flames in the fire of change. In January of the following year, the state legislature introduced the McCall Amendment, a sweeping policy aimed at mandatory body cam activation, community mediation teams, and racial bias de-escalation training. It was controversial. It passed by a single vote, and it was signed into law on the steps of City Hall, with Isaiah and Denise standing behind the governor. They didn't smile. They stood in quiet dignity. The moment wasn't about celebration. It was about duty, legacy, justice with a human face. Months into Isaiah's national influence, a woman named Nia Holloway sent him an email. She had filmed the original viral video from her bedroom window. She was the one who had uploaded it with the caption, "Another black man, another bullet. When will it end?" She wasn't wrong, but she also didn't know the full story. No one did. Nia wrote, "I wanted to help. I thought showing the world would protect you, but I only caught half the truth, and I'm sorry." Isaiah invited her to coffee. They met at a small local cafe. No cameras, no press, just two people trying to undo what fear and urgency had done to their city. They talked for 3 hours, and by the end of it, Nia asked, "Can I help tell the rest of your story?" Isaiah smiled and said, "Yes, but only if you help others tell theirs too." With Nia's help, Isaiah began producing a feature-length documentary called Frame the Truth. It told everything: the moments before the video, the seconds after, the trauma, the misunderstanding, the redemption, the humanity. The film premiered at Sundance and received a standing ovation. Netflix picked it up for global release. The trailer featured Isaiah's now famous words. The world saw one frame. I'm here to show them the rest of the film. When the documentary aired, something extraordinary happened. Police departments across 3 major cities began screening it as required training material. High schools began classroom discussions. And online, the comments section, usually a swamp of division, was filled with gratitude. One day, a reporter interviewing Isaiah noticed something new on his left forearm. A tattoo. It was a small frame, like a camera's focus box. Inside it, a heart. "What's that mean?" they asked. Isaiah looked down at it and said, "It's a reminder that every frame we capture of someone misses what's inside." Years passed. Hank Rowley's hair turned gray. He stayed active in the community, never seeking fame, always doing the quiet work, counseling young officers, talking to grieving families, cleaning alleys where he once feared for his life. He never asked for a second chance, but he used it well. He passed away peacefully at the age of 71. No fanfare, no headlines. At his funeral, there were only 2 speakers, his daughter and Isaiah McCall. Isaiah stood in a small church and said, "He almost took my life, but then he gave me a reason to live it differently. That's not excusing. That's transforming. That's what grace does." Isaiah grew older. He turned 40 with salt in his beard and calm in his voice. Frame the Truth became a national movement. Young leaders he mentored went on to become senators, lawyers, educators. One became the youngest police chief in the city's history. On the anniversary of the viral video, Isaiah stood once more in that alley. It had been repaved, the mural restored, the lights brightened. But the power of that place wasn't in what happened. It was in what followed. Isaiah sat down years later to write a memoir. The first sentence read, "What you didn't see in the viral video was a man being remade, not destroyed, not defeated, not devoured by bitterness, but remade by pain, by love, by choice." Years after the incident, the city decided to honor Isaiah's role in transforming national discourse on justice and mercy. But Isaiah declined statues or highways named after him. Instead, he asked for a peace garden to be built near the alley where the incident occurred, a place of quiet reflection for anyone who had ever been profiled, misunderstood, or nearly broken. The garden had a small fountain flowing like time, benches made from recycled wood, symbolizing restoration, a stone path engraved with names, not of the famous, but of locals who had helped their community heal. At the garden's center stood a single sculpture, a camera lens, cracked down the middle, with flowers growing out of it. A plaque read, "To all the stories never told, and to the lives that lived anyway." 10 years to the day of the near shooting, Isaiah received a letter in the mail with no return address. It simply read, "I was the officer who trained Hank. I taught him to shoot before he learned to listen. I taught him fear before I taught him restraint. I'm sorry for what I passed down." Inside the envelope was a medal, an old academy badge from the 1980s. Isaiah wept, not because it was closure, but because it proved something he had always believed. Even the silent carry guilt, and even guilt can become grace. At a youth event in Detroit, Isaiah was signing copies of his memoir when a boy approached him. He couldn't have been older than 11. He handed Isaiah a folded piece of cardboard. It read, "I'm scared every time my dad wears his uniform, but I'm proud of him too. Thank you for helping me feel both." Isaiah reached across the table and hugged him. No words, just that. Later that night, Isaiah would tell a friend, "That kid understood everything I've ever tried to say in 4 sentences." One morning, Isaiah opened his inbox and saw a message from the widow of a man who had died in a police shooting 3 years earlier in another state. She wrote, "I didn't get the outcome you got. I didn't get the apology. I didn't get the peace. But when I watched your documentary, I felt like you carried part of my grief for me. And for that, I will always be grateful." Isaiah replied, "I carry it with you. Always. Not just yours, but all of ours." She later joined his nonprofit board, with the help of universities, civil rights groups, and even unexpected partners in law enforcement. Isaiah launched the McCall Legacy Fellowship, an annual program selecting 20 young people from underserved communities, training them in conflict resolution, public speaking, legal literacy, grassroots activism, digital ethics. Graduates went on to start podcasts, community gardens, reentry programs, and mental health clinics. But one young woman, Elena Torres, said something that stuck with Isaiah. "You didn't just survive, Mr. McCall. You turned surviving into an institution." Isaiah's mother, Denise, passed away peacefully at the age of 78. She had lived long enough to see her son honored at the White House, featured on the cover of Time, and invited to speak at the UN. At her funeral, Isaiah found a handwritten note in her Bible. It read, "I once feared I'd lose you to the very same hate this world throws at every black boy. But now I see I didn't raise a survivor. I raised a bridge." Isaiah cried harder than he had in years. He folded the note and kept it in his wallet. 20 years after the video first went viral, a major news network aired a retrospective documentary about the modern civil rights movement. They began with the infamous footage of Isaiah in the alley. But this time, they didn't stop the video after the trigger pull. They showed the miss. They showed Hank's trembling hands. They showed Isaiah's forgiveness. They showed the garden, the bills, the children he mentored, the cities he healed. And the documentary ended with this sentence on the screen: "History often begins with pain, but it's written by what we choose to do after the pain." Isaiah knew his time in public life was winding down. His beard was gray now, his voice softer, but the fire in his heart hadn't faded. He began a final speaking tour called Beyond the Frame. He visited every city that had experienced a tragedy like his own. He didn't offer speeches. He offered listening, circles, storytelling, spaces for those who'd never been seen or heard. And in every city, he ended with the same line: "We were never just what happened to us. We are what we build from it." A month before he passed, Isaiah sat down for his final interview. When asked what he wanted people to remember, he said, "I want them to remember that I was almost a hashtag, but I became a handshake between two broken systems and two broken people who didn't stay broken forever." He looked at the camera and smiled. "The world only saw a frame. I gave them the rest." Long after Isaiah was gone, children who had once sat in his classrooms or circles would recount him in stories. "He never yelled," one girl said, "even when we messed up. He taught me how to breathe through fear," another boy whispered at a local remembrance. Isaiah had once said, "Children don't need saviors. They need someone to believe they're already worth saving." And that's what he gave them, not just lessons, but dignity. And dignity, once given, never dies. On the day of Isaiah's funeral, hundreds gathered: activists, lawmakers, neighbors, kids, and even officers in uniform. Hank did not attend in person, but a letter he had written was read aloud by Isaiah's niece. It began, "I pointed a gun at a man who didn't deserve it, and in return he pointed a generation toward grace." He went on, "Isaiah McCall could have left me behind. Instead, he brought me with him, not because I was innocent, but because I was human." The crowd wept, because in that moment, the full circle had closed. The viral video was no longer just a moment in history. It was now part of every civil rights curriculum, restorative justice seminar, and social ethics course. Professors asked students, "What would you have done if you were Isaiah? What does justice look like if you survive? How do we build systems that prevent, not react?" The frame had expanded. What once was a 14-second clip on Twitter became the cornerstone of a new way to think. Isaiah's final act before his death was quiet. He left handwritten letters to a dozen people. some famous, some forgotten. To the teenage boy who took the original video, thank you for not looking away. To the paramedic who held his hand after the shot, I remember your silence. It felt safe. To the officer in New Orleans who changed policies in her precinct, you made sure no one else stood where I stood. To the child of Hank, your father's mistake didn't define him, and it won't define you. Each letter ended the same. We are not our worst moment. We are the moment after. In his final days, Isaiah wasn't at a hospital. He was at home, surrounded by friends, family, and soft gospel music. He asked for no machines, no headlines, no cameras, just stillness. He watched the sunset each night from his porch in Atlanta, sometimes alone, sometimes holding his niece's hand. One night, she asked him, "Are you scared?" Isaiah smiled, the same way he had that day in the alley, when he was unsure but defiant. "No," he said. The video ended, but the story didn't, and I got to write mine. What you didn't see in the viral video was the book it would become, was the bill that passed, was the boy who forgave, was the man who transformed pain into policy. You didn't see the gardens, the scholarships, the shift in conversations. You didn't see the bullet miss, the officer break, the nation pause. But now you've seen it all. The truth was never just in the video. It was in everything that followed. And now it's in you.